Ladies and gentlemen, this is the main event of the evening.
Welcome back to another edition of Having a Crack with Big Mac, Roscoe and Jono. And in today's episode, we ventured out to the lovely old Brunswick, where we interviewed Andrew Fitzgerald, the co-owner of the Gospel Rye Whiskey. Now, we had a great discussion with Andrew within his facilities there, and we touched on quite a lot of aspects about the rye whiskey industry and how it's starting to come of age within the Australian market as well. And there's a lot of history that Andrew's played a role in within the spirit industry in Australia. And within this interview, we'll showcase some of what Andrew is bringing to the market with the beautiful product, the Gospel Whiskey. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of Having a Crack with Big Mac, Jono and Roscoe. And today we have some beautiful bit of local royalty within the whiskey industry today. And we have on the podcast Andrew Fitzgerald, the owner of the Gospel Whiskey. Welcome aboard the podcast. Andrew, how are you?
G'day, I'm good. How you going?
Not too bad, boys. How are we?
Yeah, pretty good. Very excited. We're in an absolute premises here that it's sort of, you wander in and you just got that scent straight away. The whiskey, you can smell it, and we're stacked around the barrels here and having a good chat, and going to be very excited to taste a couple of whiskeys here from the Gospel team, which could be very good.
Fantastic. We certainly are. We just had a little bit of a tour with Andrew just before around these premises as well, and we might kick it off with a few opening questions. The easiest one, Andrew. So a bit of background about yourself, mate.
Well, how far should I go back? Born in 19... So, background about myself, I guess, a bit of a storied career before getting into whiskey. Started life as a trade, went on and as a Boilermaker welder, went on and did a second trade as a fitter, and went on and did engineering at university. And then worked about 16 years in mining industry, so major projects, and later looking at the feasibility of new projects. So that was sort of the background prior to whiskey. And then in about 2012, 2013, I was working with Ben, who is now my business partner and co-founder of the Gospel. And I've always been a bit of a tinkerer, making bits and pieces, messing with cars, messing with motorbikes. And so I was out one night with Ben, and as you do, having one too many drinks on one of the many Melbourne rooftops, talking about life. And I said to him, boy, I'd really like to know how to make whiskey. And Ben being from South Carolina sort of broke out his phone. I think it would have been an iPhone 1 at that stage, and started flicking through photos of his still back home in South Carolina. And sort of he went on to explain that he'd sort of been making some form of liquor since he was pre-teen. So, that was pretty... I was like, all right, we're going to get this going. So depending on whether you work for the Australian Tax Office or not, we may have put something in my garage in Carlton, and we may have just gone on and started making some spirit, and it evolved from there. We built our first distillery, and it was never intended to be a career, but it was sort of a passion that evolved, and now we're here.
Fantastic, and you touch on obviously you've really tried to build yourself from the ground up as well with those sort of earlier years doing the engineering and all that sort of hands-on sort of approach as well, and now you've sort of transformed that into what your passion is really in whiskey as well.
Yeah, I think it's like I think Ben and I are just grafters. We're just those people that sort of really wanted to always test ourselves and push ourselves, and I think that was both our careers and now sort of with whiskey we've sort of tried to grow the brand and grow the business and try and push beyond the average.
And I'm guessing Victorian boys. Obviously, you're both based now, obviously in Victoria. But were you always in Victoria?
No. Ben's from South Carolina, born and raised. He moved to Australia probably about I want to say 13, 14 years ago, but could have been sort of 15. He moved. He was working in Perth, and that's where I first met him. We were working on a project in Perth, and then. But I'm originally from Adelaide, actually outside of Adelaide originally, and then in and around the Port Adelaide area of Adelaide, But look, I moved down of Adelaide when I was quite young, and I've lived all over the world and that sort of thing. But Melbourne and the greater Victoria has been home for probably the longest I've ever stayed anywhere. So.
Fantastic. So maybe in regards to the brand, the Gospel Whiskey, what drew you to make this brand what it is today?
Yeah, I mean, quite a few people ask us about the actual name of the Gospel and that sort of thing. So it's quite interesting. Sometimes I do get a lot of sort of questions in regards to the alignment with Christianity and things like that, but it really doesn't have anything at all to do with that. It's sort of it was an evolution of brand development. So we've got a couple of I like to call them silent co-founders within the business. One of those is Jamie Duff. Jamie was he was the co-founder of Stolen Rum. He's actually a Kiwi, but we'll forgive him, except for at cricket time. And the other one is Kelvin So, and Kelvin's sort of a branding guy, and he sort of has done a lot of amazing sort of brand work. Stolen Rum was one of them, but also lots of other alcohol brands. So they're actually friends through other acquaintances, and they were sort of in and bootstrapped the brand with us early days. And one of the first concepts, because I'm a bit of a record collector and love music, and so our initial brand for our rye whiskey was going to be Astor, and that was named after a defunct record label in Port Melbourne. And we had some trademark issues. There's an Astor Wines in the US, which, funnily enough, have now become friends. So they had we couldn't register the trademark, so we had to go back to square one. And at the time, I was actually touring with a band, a hip-hop group called Black Alicious, and I was touring with them, and I was actually collecting records and buying a lot of gospel. And so the nucleus was I was buying gospel records. We were trying to think of another way to integrate my love for music and music into the brand. And so gospel sort of was listed on a sheet and talked about. But then Kelvin, who's a much more intelligent human than I, sort of did a lot of work on, what gospel would mean in regards to whiskey and how it connects. And it's really amazing that the basis of whiskey really is rooted quite a lot in monasteries and, early monks, in the early days, monks travelling back from Northern Africa and making a distillate, which they proposed was medicinal. They were obviously just getting drunk, but... and whiskey sort of grew from there, and so that, and also the gospel meaning the truth, really aligns with what we're about as a brand. So it kind of makes sense, and I'm actually incredibly happy that we ended up with the gospel as the brand name, and that's the basis of the brand name, I guess.
Fantastic, no doubt. It's definitely an emphatic type of name, especially when you're talking whiskey as well. It's really, really good, mate. And in terms of the bottles, now the ones we've got on the table here, you do have a couple of clear bottles. You've got two green bottles, and then a darker, I guess, brownie sort of coloured glass bottle as well. So, what's the concept sort of behind the different colours for the glass that you've done in the shape of the bottle?
Yeah, I think this is kind of the genius of Kelvin, and some of my passion as well in regards to aesthetics of the brand. I'm a firm believer in sort of centrality in a brand, but also distinctiveness. So, there's this need to sort of fit a certain category in a sense of like you are familiar and people know what you are and that sort of thing, but also causing some sort of tension of being different. And so when we were thinking about coming out with a whiskey, one, traditionally sort of single malts will go in a coloured bottle, or some, you look at Lafroig and things like that might be in a coloured bottle. But traditionally, sort of American-style whiskies, which rye arguably I think is now a world whiskey, but was originated in the Americas, would be in a clear bottle. So we're like, okay, let's play with that tension there, and then obviously there wasn't many coloured square bottles in whiskey, so which. Square tends to lean towards American style of whiskey. So, yeah, we just really like the idea of causing that tension in our brand, and that's sort of carried through on everything, even our label format and everything is sort of some sort of tension there.
And pitching it back a little bit to the beginning of Gospel Whiskey. So what does it take to start out a brand like this as well? Where did it all have to begin from?
Well, look, I mean, I guess here's the opportunity for me to be inspirational to other people. But I would actually say that it takes, a lot of stupidity and even more money. But, I think, I'd actually built a career around looking at the feasibility of certain projects. And if I'd ever done a feasibility study on starting a whiskey brand, I would have killed it on the head. And, I think it's the very fact that my passion led me here, not my brain, is how we got here. But, it's, what it takes is that, I think if anyone is thinking about starting a whiskey brand or any alcohol brand, is you actually, if it's just purely a passion, then I'd say keep it in the garage, because it actually becomes an all-encompassing life. So, and once it becomes that, everyone needs money to survive. So, that actually starts to complicate things. So, what does it take? I would stick with the one line and say it takes stupidity.
Well, that and passion. You gave us a walkthrough before, and you're taking us along and explaining everything, and you've put thought and passion into every part of this place, and and lots of hours. You were saying, and lots of weekends gone and everything.
Yeah, look, I mean, the one thing about an alcohol brand is you should potentially think about the things that aren't, like when you're starting a business like this, you should actually think about the things that aren't the passion portion, right? So the route to market, your cost of goods, your, and sort of, your price point in market, your, how much you're going to, all those things that are actually the things I bloody hate, right? I'm not passionate about cost of goods, right? I'm passionate about making whiskey, sharing whiskey, developing a brand. I'm passionate about those things, but they, in the long run, don't matter. If you can make the best whiskey in the world, but if you can't get it to market, then it's sort of, you might as well be making it in a garage. And that's really what I'm saying is, if you're going to start in this business, first and foremost, think about your route to market and think about those things you're not passionate about, or get business partners in that think about and love those things, which unfortunately we didn't, but yeah.
And you explained before as well, your love and passion for rye whiskey itself. Is that, like we've seen a lot of distilleries across Australia that might start initially with their gins and vodkas, and then they slowly progress, obviously, into a whiskey multiple years down the track and that sort of thing once they've mastered their initial gin and vodkas. Is there a reason why you deliberately sort of bypass that sort of vodka gin sort of side of things and just kicked on straight into whiskey as well?
Yeah, like I mean, again, if we're talking about following passion, I like gin. I make a lot of gin, but I'm not necessarily passionate about gin. Like I listen to, say, founders of gin brands, and they talk about it, and they talk about it like I talk about whiskey, and that's how it should be. And if So, we started off, Ben and I's first brand was Melbourne Moonshine, and, that was an American-style spirit. And I think, like, Ben being from America, and I always liked American-style whiskies, it sort of led us in that direction. And then it evolved. I mean, there was a couple of catalysts which made us make rye in particular. One of those was, I drink a lot of old fashions. I was introduced to a rye old fashioned by a bartender who's now become a very good friend, Sean Maguire, and he was running a bar called New Amsterdam in Melbourne, and he made me a rye old fashioned. I don't know what rye he used. It's probably High West or Rittenhouse. And right then I was like, okay, well, I'm drinking rye old fashions for the rest of my life, and then. And also the fact that if we made a bourbon here, we couldn't call it bourbon, so that didn't make sense. So rye made sense there. And we could see a growing market for rye whiskey. So all those things is why we sort of focused on rye. So style of whiskey we love, and one that we thought would make sense in market, if that makes sense to you.
And one thing that you guys have got coming in is like the specific setup for this rye whiskey that you have, and you were talking about it when we done that little tour out the back there. We saw the grain coming in. You've got that coming directly from, like the Victorian guys. Is that where that's come, the rye grains?
Yeah, we single source our rye from a farm that actually spans Victoria to South Australia. It's in the Murray-Mallee region. It's out near the Pinaroo, which is a South Australian town, but it's right on the border. We source all our rye as a single source from that region. Yeah.
And would that be due to the climate through that region is completely different to something, say, in Gippsland or in another region in Victoria as well?
Yeah, so I'm actually a firm believer in source of produce, and I don't want to use the word because I know it's dirty in whiskey, but terroir. And I think there's a couple of primary factors which impact the flavour of whiskey, and one of them, the type of grain. So the variety of grain, and I'm not talking just whether it's barley or rye, because I think that's instinctively, it's different. But, varieties of rye, for instance, can vary greatly. And then the climate in which that rye is grown or that grain is grown can directly impact the flavour of the whiskey. And I would have probably laughed at this 5 years ago, but having when we first started distilling and sourcing rye from the Mallee, the farmer couldn't supply at one stage. It was actually more of a transport issue, so we saw some rye out of a wet area that got a lot more rain, and we straight away noticed a difference in character in the new make spirit. To this day, we still source occasionally rye from another region, Gippsland in particular, just to make certain small batch releases to show. I mean, it's my aspirations to show and try and teach people about what I'm seeing in the distillate between two different regions, which we're same variety of rye, two different regions. So we do these small batches of same variety, different regions, or same region, different varieties. Really, so I aspire to in the next sort of couple of years to show those releases and explain, the impact on product.
Obviously a point of difference with the growing conditions and, the grains, obviously similar grain and that sort of thing. But, yeah, it'd be interesting to see and how far away those little select batches that might be out and about in the near future at all, or is that something that's still a while off?
Like age-wise, we've probably got some that are already at 2 years. But, I made the mistake probably a couple of years ago of, committing to certain project releases because I thought, look, they'll be old enough then. But, we don't pick barrels because they've hit an age milestone. We actually pick barrels when they're right. Obviously, we use the age milestone as like they're ready to look at. I would say they'll come out in the next couple of years. As I said, a couple of them are already over that 2 year mark. But whether they're ready to see the light of day, probably not yet.
And just sort of touching on something that's more current, I suppose, as well with the current floods that are going on in Victoria as well. Is there certain things that you might put in place, I suppose, in terms of either stocking up on enough rye as well to sort of cover you in case of certain disasters and floods and all that sort of thing sort of happen and affect the crops that you're sourcing from as well, or are you able to then locate from another source as well if this sort of happens?
Look, I mean, when we talk about sort of single source farm rye, it may sound as though we're just putting a craft slant on things, but truth be told, it's because we have an incredibly good working relationship with that, and that's what a small business like ours is, reliant on is good relationships. So I know Corey he houses in his silo. If we say what we're going to use in a year, he houses stock for us, and which is incredible. He gives us, probably shouldn't share this because other people might want it from him, but he gives us favourable payment terms. He knows that whatever we take off of him today, we don't actually sell for 3 years. So he gives us a bit of relief there because he believes in what we're doing. He believes in our products. So there's no real risk in regards to climate, in regards to supply chain for us because of that relationship, which is can't be replaced through commercial agreements. It's more of a handshake deal between us.
So did you have to do a lot of experimentation before you found this particular rye, or?
Yeah, yes and no. So we ran through a couple of different, sourced rye through a broker, sourced rye through a farm in up near Mildura, sourced rye from Corey, we ended up landing on Corey for probably mostly the relationship to begin with. He was a straight shooter and believed in what we're doing. So I think that sort of was more the experimentation first, because we certainly didn't make batches of whiskey and then wait 3 years before we decided on our farmer. We really couldn't afford to do that. But by default, that's now that I have made it from other regions, I know I'm backing the right horse, so we will, continue to sort of try and explain that to people.
And in terms of a rye Australian whiskey, how many other producers are there in the country at the moment that are doing something so niche like this as well? We see a lot of whiskey producers in Australia, but not necessarily rye whiskey producers in Australia. So how many would you say distillers there are at the moment in the country?
There's a few. I think probably 4 or 5. I don't think there's any other dedicated rye whiskey producers. I think we'd probably be the only dedicated rye whiskey producer. I always sort of see Peter Bignell, and he's got a rye farm down there in Tasmania. He was certainly the first rye whiskey to come out of Australia, and would certainly credit him for that. And there's some other producers. Obviously, Archie Rose makes an incredible malted rye or a malt rye whiskey. I think that's a standout whiskey producer, whiskey product in market. Distinctly different to ours, but nevertheless delicious. So yeah, there's a few, and I think it may increase in the coming years.
That was probably my next question I was going to ask you as well. In the next 10 years, do you sort of see a definite increase with rye whiskey producers as well?
Yeah, I think so. Having just come back from Berlin, I certainly see that rye is fast becoming a world whiskey. So people talk about obviously single malt, having its home in Scotland, and bourbon obviously having its home in America. And traditionally, rye, you would argue, was a North American spirit, but it's been adapted across the world a lot quicker than those other formats have, I feel, especially sort of up-and-coming brands. So
you touched on then America and Canada, I suppose, are two other sort of big producers of rye as well. So in terms of our growing conditions and what our whiskey sort of can produce versus a Canadian and American whiskey in rye as well, do you sort of see a similar tendencies in terms of taste and complexion as well across the different or 3 different countries' whiskies?
Yeah, I think one of the 2 key factors in the flavour of grain is the variety, or not just the species, but the variety of the particular grain. and also the growing conditions. So a lot of those regions you just mentioned actually a cool climate, up around Pennsylvania where a lot of rye is grown. In the Canadians, it's a lot of rye grown where it's quite cold. One of the beauties of rye is it's almost a weed, right? So it has a very deep root system, so it can grow where there's not a lot of rain. So that's good in two areas, right? So where it's actually cold, there's not much moisture in the ground when it's freezing, so rye tends to be quite hardy and survives those conditions. But in Australia, there's not much moisture in the ground because there's no rain, so it also survives that. With that deep root system, it stabilises sandy soils, and there's lots of things about rye which makes it a great beneficial crop for farmers. A lot of farmers will actually plant a rye crop when they see the nutrients dropping in soil. They'll sort of alternate and put a rye crop in there, turn that over and reintroduce nutrients into the soil. They'll stabilise soils using it. There's lots of things that rye is good for. In regards to flavour varieties, because of that climate difference, we get a distinct flavour character, I think, in our rye. But also because of the species, there's a lot of species being grown in sort of Minnesota and Pennsylvania, which we don't have here. I'm working towards hopefully growing some of those varieties here and proving up some seed content. But that's going to take time. To get from a small handbag full of rye to a crop is several years.
When you took us through the distillery before and showed us obviously the column still and your pot still as well that you've got too, I suppose a brief overview for the listeners as well. The column still, just maybe touch on just that process obviously of how you sort of produce that as well, why it's unique.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we designed and developed the whole distillery to produce rye whiskey. So, I really feel for those producers that build distilleries for single malt and then think they're going to pump out some rye. It's like I've been on that journey, and good luck to them. But in regards to sort of the column still, so we designed and built the column still ourselves. Very much, and it's a very efficient way of distilling. So we use it as our stripping still. Basically that produces the low wines, and those low wines are finished in a pot.
Perfect, mate. Now I think we might crack open a bottle or two here, mate, and
sure,
have a little splash.
So I've got a few things here. So I've got our Solera rye, which typically our Solera, as I may have mentioned, we're sort of moving house, so typically our Solera is set up not far from where we're sitting. Solera is a connection of multiple barrels together. I mean, Solera has been adapted on multiple things to talk about fractional blending, but we sort of adapted more of a traditional way in our Solera of actually cascading through multiple barrels, which is Solera comes from sort of a fortified wine tradition in Spain and Portugal for the sherries and ports. So with us, we basically enter our spirit in the top barrel, and it cascades through multiple barrels. Our Solera, I think, is 24 barrels. I'm sure if Ian, Master Distiller, listens to this, he may correct me, but I walk past it more than what I look at it. So anyway, so it's multiple barrels connected together. And so the first thing we'll try is probably our Solera. I suggest that because it's lowest in ABV, except for our non-alc, which I have here. But it's lowest in ABV, so, we'll progress up to, I think we'll probably finish off on my 52% one.
Delicious. Sounds good.
So there's a bucket there. If you are driving, you don't have to consume the whole thing. I'm aware of that, Jared. You sort of, don't want you leaving here getting a little loose.
Yes, no, I definitely need my license for my job.
So the Solera was, so we omit the term whiskey on the Solera, mainly because it's a fractional blending. We can't guarantee that new make spirit doesn't make its way somewhere into the final product, and or anything less than 2 years. And because of the laws here in Australia, it needs to be guaranteed to be 2 years in an oak container. So we don't apply the word whiskey. But if this was in America, arguably the birthplace of rye whiskey, we would certainly call it a whiskey because there it meets the criteria. So this goes through New American Oak, second fill American Oak, and then it's finished in Australian wine barrels. And that's really just to throw a little bit more tannin to it, and so it goes through lots of vanilla. They're varying chars, those barrels. So the beauty of the Solera is it allows us to really, let's say, tinker with the whiskey that we're making. So we adjusted chars to get the more extractive maturation principles in there. Then we put heavier toasts in there to put the more introductory sort of vanillins and furfuls into the spirit. Then we finish in those wine barrels to really give that impact of the tannins and a little bit more sort of rippling complexity. And I think this is a great product. We say, don't overcomplicate it. Mix it with dry ginger, or smash it in a Lynchburg or something like that. It's a really approachable spirit, and we've really tried to work to balance out the integration between grain and cask.
That is absolutely delicious. I've just had a sip there, and boys, what do you think?
It's very fresh. You get the grassy nose on it as well initially. So, did you mention the wine barrel finish is also part of that Solera system? Or
Yes.
Is it set aside?
No.
Okay,
It's in the Solera.
So obviously, you'd have to rank those barrels, as you said. You've got your charred ones starting off, and it's a pyramid, or not a pyramid style, but a cascading sort of style. As you
That's
said.
correct. So
Liquid
the bottom row is Aussie wine barrels.
Okay, yep,
Predominantly Pinot or Gamay barrels. We have a preference for sourcing barrels from minimal intervention winemakers, really, because they tend to use a lot less sulfur. They don't use sulfur at all, but they tend to use a lot less. So less concern there with the sulfur extraction.
Yep, and it's coming through on the nose on that. I can smell a little bit.
Definitely getting that richness coming through straight from the wine barrels as well. You really do, and I've had a lot of Solera rums. That's generally why my background that I've had on Solera spirits. I've generally been across rums, and that's where you can sort of get a similar colour scheme as what that's coming through with, but a very, very different style and taste, and even texture as well. You can see how thick that is around the glass too. So
yeah, it's quite viscous. It's got some legs on it, but I think it's quite tasty. I tend to drink a bit of it, so it goes all right.
Yep.
Very approachable.
Fantastic.
Quite an oily finish in it as well. Like it drinks well with that oil. It's nice mouthfeel and coats the mouth really well. So
yeah, I think one of the things I want to ask Ben and Ian, who much more experienced in distilling, but I'm certainly a greater critic. I'm always a critic of our products. Is the next thing I really want to work on is how we can get a better perfume to the spirit. Because the one thing I'd say is the palate. It's much bolder, much richer, much fuller than what you're getting on the nose. The nose is much leaner, but we'll get there over time. It's gradually getting older and older and older, the product. I mean, the oldest cask that we have in there would now be 6 years old, and as over time, it's sort of progressing. So it's developing over time. Between batch 10 and batch 11, you don't notice any difference, but between batch 1 and batch 11, it's a completely different spirit, and that is the nature of a true Solera.
And this was the second product you released as well, was that correct?
It's the first gospel product.
It was the first gospel product.
Yeah. So we've been around. So we released this at the very end of 2019 and actually got into market, around early 2020, and then we released our straight rye, which we'll drink next. We released that late February 2020.
Do you know if there's many others doing a Solera?
I'm not too sure. I mean, obviously Starwood has a Solera, but their Solera is like an Apera cask fractional blend, I believe. Their Solera is actually one of my favourite Aussie whiskies. I absolutely adore Starwood. I mean, I like Starwood as a brand, their products, but that Solera whiskey is, it probably wasn't the first Australian whiskey I tried, but it was probably the first Australian whiskey I wanted to go back and drink again. We're talking, almost 10 years ago. So, yeah, it's delicious.
I think there's a number of guys maybe down in Tasmania that have a sort of similar setup with Solera. I tried a couple last week, and it was only at that point that I understood for the first time. I thought Solera was actually a type of cask, whereas I understood the process behind it, and I've sort of learned that. And then obviously it's something you guys do, and you do it really well. This is a terrific drink.
Yeah, so well, it's good to hear that other people are using Soleras, and it's interesting. I think any sort of attempt to be creative in the production of whiskies, and make something different. I mean, if we're just trying to replicate either a single malt or an American whiskey, then we're really not being Australian, are we? So,
yeah, and it gives that much flexibility for creating something a bit different.
All right, so I'm going to pour out the straight rye now. So average age of the straight rye is about 3 years in cask. I mean, there might be a couple of casks in there a little bit younger, but we're creeping up to being all over 3 years because we're exporting the straight rye and so into Europe. So we meet their 3 year minimum criteria for Europe. But so straight rye, I'll tell you about after I've poured out your drinks. Yep. So Ross is opening up jar number 1. So that jar you're holding there, Ross, is actually the first distillate that Ben and I made in my garage in 2013.
I was just going to try and get a nosing on it because you mentioned obviously that you were trying to chase down that nosing. Is probably not quite where you wanted it. As you said, it's sort of a combination of many different things. But
that product there is actually 100% corn. So, but you're welcome to have a nose. So that is jar number 1, distillate number 1, still number 1. Mistake number 1 for Ben and I. So it's actually delicious. And to this day, our moonshine that we used to make back then, corn whiskey, still some of my favourite product that we've ever made. I really, really love it.
Careful there, Ross.
No, I'm holding it. It's the Holy Grail. So we're in the gospel right here. Yeah, we're holding the Holy Grail.
That is certainly the nucleus. So if you drop that, I'd tell Ben to talk to you. So... But it's, I encourage you all to have a smell, and you can smell how sweet this product is, and that's really something that I guess was the catalyst for Ben and I creating Melbourne Moonshine prior to the gospel.
So a lot of history in that glass jar right there, and as you can tell, it's got that corniness to it. Initially on that scent, I think you can get the sweetness from a corn. Is that? Would you say that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, when you talk about history, I mean, there's, photos of my daughter when she's a toddler. I mean, she's now pretty much 12 years old, standing next to us still. And, so it's definitely a bit of history in this particular jar. But, yeah, it's I really love moonshine as a category. I think the problem with it is it doesn't translate to everyone the same way. So I see moonshine as a reference to history, as a reference to a different approach, and a reference to a very clean new make spirit. But my interpretation is there's a big void between my interpretation of what moonshine is and what the general public is. The amount of times, when I was out doing tasting for Melbourne Moonshine, and people would say, do you make it in bathtubs or does it make you go blind? I mean, I think the 100th time I heard that, I sort of, was a little bit over explaining. Well, actually, to make a new make spirit, which is good to drink from the go, actually takes a lot more work than something that you're going to put into a cask. And because we never recycled faints in our moonshine. We were very tight with our cuts in our moonshine. We really put a lot of effort into that white spirit. So, but then it was not interpreted that way, and that's why today we only make apple pie moonshine, because nobody's offended by the word apple pie.
On that subject of moonshine as well, what's the market like at the moment in the States and Canada for that matter as well in terms of moonshine? Is it still a very minuscule sort of amount of market share that moonshine actually sort of creates there?
Yeah, it's very regional in the US. Certainly in the southern states, it's quite a big trade. I mean, but interestingly, I just came back from Berlin. I was in Bar Convent, which was a lot of fun, and weirdly, there's a German moonshine there that seems to be doing exceptionally well. I saw it in multiple stores. It was in a jar. It was ticking. The team that were tasting it were all wearing sort of flannel. So I was like, they were ticking every stereotype for a moonshine possible, and they look to be doing well. So who knows? There's untapped markets out there for those moonshine people.
Just had a quick sip on this, boys. Massive amount of pepperiness, I reckon you get straight away off the burst. That's definitely very distinct on that.
Yeah, this for me is a celebration of Australian rye. So, and that's really what I wanted to put in a glass, is something that is distinctly desert-grown rye.
It seems almost a little bit of a smokiness to the nose as well. Like, it's obviously not as grassy as the first Solera cask that we had. So is there sort of the char level on this one is, in a single barrel, is that one of the characteristics that goes into this?
No, so typically our straight rye is a blend of about, I think we're doing 21 barrel blends now. So, and we do have both heavy char and light char, predominantly light char. So we are taking a very cereal forward new make spirit, and we try and balance that out with heavily toasted barrels. So, as much as people think we're sort of very brand focused, our production is, heavily curated. So we actually run the R&D program here for the International Stave Company, which is a cooperage out of Kentucky. So we run their R&D program here in Australia. So we do a lot of work with them in regards to their barrel profiles. And one of the things that we try and do is get a very heavy toast to all their barrels, and some of them with quite a light char. So what we're trying to do there is introduce those sort of sweeter characteristics from the oak. It's a long seasoned oak, and then heavily toasted. So we're getting all those sweet sugars coming out of the oak, and we're really doing that to really try and balance out the cereal forward new make. So I call it it's like we're trying to achieve a rye toast with honey and butter on top of it. That's really what we're trying to achieve there.
That was my breakfast yesterday morning, that was.
Not too shabby.
A bit of honey on toast. It is quite amazing, though, like the mouthfeel on this versus the Solera, straight off the bat, you're getting a real big, deep impact in the flavour and the taste. But I just noticed before as well, after it sort of died down, dissipated a little bit more, the sweeter notes have lingered at the end. That's when it's really come to life, the sweeter notes for me, whereas the majority of the whole experience and complexion of that whiskey itself has all been quite a spicy sort of finish as well in there too, but the sweetness does come at the end.
Yeah, look, I'm really proud of our straight rye. Us Ben and Ian, I'm a critic, very much a natural-born critic. Anyone that knows me would know I'm a bit of a critic of everything that we try and produce. But with the straight rye, I think we're continually refining it in our blend, and as I said, curating it as a final product. But it's really at a point now where it is both distinctly rye, but distinctly different, and that's what I wanted to achieve. I don't want to taste like an MGP rye. I want to taste like an Australian rye.
It's got those sweet flavours at the end that hits on those caramels and vanillas almost for me, and the light peppery notes initially and all that. It's a well-rounded drink. I think it's quite balanced as well, which is good. Like it's a nice. What alcohol content would this be as well?
Oh, it's a lazy 45. Okay. So it's quite approachable. Yeah, so I'm glad you're enjoying it. I mean, I tend to consume a bit of that as well.
It's definitely my first introduction to rye Australian whiskey. The only other rye I've ever consumed was the Bullet Bourbon rye, which I think personally is probably one of the better rye mainstream sort of offerings in, I suppose in the Australian market as well. I'm sure there's a truckload better ryes in America as well, but
there's some great ryes out there, like even Sazerac rye is phenomenal. I really like Rittenhouse rye. It's delicious. I think it's Heaven Hill product. Lot 40 out of Canada is a great rye. There's some really, we have a library here of pretty much any rye I can get my hands on, and there's some cracking ryes out there.
Is there certain products and brands, I suppose, you can sort of take a little bit of inspiration on in terms of their flavours that they've tried to take on for their style and try and adapt a new concept within Australia, but sort of harnessing some of their characteristics that they might have used as well?
I would say less so now, right? So maybe in the early days, we'd taste things and go, oh, look, we should be more like that. I think the constant that I have now is more about being, I guess, more more approachable, right? So I'm always cautious that my palate is a palate that's had 15 years of straight whiskey drinking attached to it, which is not necessarily the palate of the general consumer. So we really just work towards refining our product to be approachable to more people. So, but let's look. There's brands out there that I really admire in regards to what they do in their sort of ethos as a company, but not so much just on producing a particular product.
All right, so I think you might have.
So we're going to finish off on a bottle which won't see the light of day here in Australia. It's an export cask that we put together, and sitting at 52% ABV, so it's good for this time of day. Sort of really sets you up for success in the balance of the day, keeping in mind it is the morning.
10:45.
So this one here is the first one that you're going to try from us, which is not 100% rye. This is actually 51% rye, 49% pale malt barley.
Yeah, that's got a lovely dark colour to it.
Yeah, this is a little bit interesting. It's had both New American oak maturation and some wine cask finishing. So, we don't often put out things which are not 100% rye. Well, we haven't to date, but this is one of those.
And how long did you let that one sit in the barrel for?
This is closing on a 4-year whiskey. So, but I think about 2.5 in New American oak and about a year in wine cask.
And you were saying this is a exported product that you're planning to do. So, which markets are you planning to push this one out to?
So this is a single cask select for an export market. So this is going into the Asian market, and we've got another similar cask which we put out, which will be going out through an independent bottler next year. So we're kind of just doing some export releases of particular styles which we think are interesting.
It's funny that the Asian market itself as well, they seem to be really, really keen and interested, obviously, on a lot of Australian whiskies to date. I mean, we spoke with the Chief Sons guys as well a few months back, and they were saying the exact same thing, that they had exported a bit of product, obviously, over to Asian parts of the world as well. So obviously yourselves are doing it too. It seems like it is a developing and growing situation that a lot of distillers are finding themselves in.
Yeah, look, we're not actually. We've probably grown export markets as much as we want to do at this point, because Australia has to remain our focus for a little while. Until I can meet a random stranger in a store and they know of the gospel, I don't think our job here is done. So, with certain products, certain limited releases. But yeah, we're in Hong Kong, Singapore, some China distribution, also in Germany, France, limited distribution in the UK and the US. So yeah, we're in a few export markets, and just heading into a couple of more in the coming year.
And so you mentioned this was a 51% rye and a 49% single malt sort of grain combination with this one, and I reckon it's a touch more fruity. Whether that's with the cask finishing and whatnot, but it feels a touch more fruity in the finish on the drink there. And again, a little bit higher in the alcohol content, but it drinks well. And yeah, it's I don't know, I just feel like there's the light peppers, there's the oak and the tannin sort of taste that comes in as well. But then you've got perhaps even a little bit of a fruitiness to it that maybe the other two haven't had so far. Would you say that's sort of one of the characteristics?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a combination of two things. I think there's a softness which is promoted by the malt, right? So that gives this soft blanket feel to the product, and then you get this layer from the wine cask, which is adding that sort of fruitiness to it. And I think the first part amplifies the second part, and that's what we're getting there.
Yeah, definitely. I can really get that softness come through, and then the taste is actually really good on this. So it's a shame we can't get it here.
It's almost like going back from the last whiskey you just showed us as well with the straight rye. It's like this one's trying to almost give you a little bit of that sort of warmth and pepperiness, and then it just gets masked a little bit with that the barley in there as well. It's just giving it a complete difference in comparison to the straight rye as well.
Yeah, I think it's a more curious whiskey. I'd sort of call it a gateway drug to rye, almost like, you can sort of give this to a single malt drinker and they won't be offended, and a rye drinker and they also won't be offended.
And then in terms of price points as well, I reckon we sort of briefly touch on as well for most of the products that, obviously except for the export one, but the main two for you guys here in the Solera and the straight rye, what sort of price per bottle would most people be looking to pay at most retailers?
Yeah, so undiscounted Solera sits at around about $80, and then and is often discounted down to the mid-70s, which is exciting to see, because that's not us making the discount, it's the retailer, which is, for me, really quite exciting to see them trying to promote a product which is, made by us. And straight rye usually sits in the early 90s. Some independent bottle shops may have it up around 94, 95. Some of the larger chains might have it down at the sort of 91, 92, but it's all around the sort of 90s mark.
So very affordable for anyone to sort of go out and pick up a bottle. And I was looking at your website the other day, and I do love that you've got a bit of a slogan on there.
Whiskey is religion, rye is the gospel one, or what one are we talking about?
Making whiskey for your mouth and not for your shelf.
Yes, I definitely, we share a very similar philosophy with Starwood in that context, right? And that is that, I collect moments shared when I drink whiskey. I don't collect whiskey bottles. I've got hundreds of them, but I drink them all. And so because the fun part is the moment of sharing it, the discussions you have when you're sharing it, whether it's at a party or whether it's when your mate comes back to your house after you've sort of already been at a party, those conversations and those experiences that you have when you consume whiskey is what I collect. I'm not collecting the bottle. I respect people that collect bottles. As someone that collects records, I understand why they do it. It's an obsession. It's a fanaticism. And so we didn't really want to make a whiskey which just was collected dust. We really just want to make a whiskey which is the thing you remember when you and your mate made that mistake, right? Or had that great time. Whatever it is, we want that sort of to share a part of that piece of your sort of history.
That's the thing. It's an enjoyable drink, and you can certainly share it with your mate. And as you say, it's kind of collecting those times where you've got a new whiskey, your mate's into whiskey. Oh, look, I've grabbed this one. Why don't pop over for a drink, and we can we'll crack open the bottle together and have a taste together and share it. And then that's a perfect sort of. Really, you don't want a whiskey that sits on the shelf collecting dust. You want to have it there. You want it to be approachable. You want it to be enjoyable. You want it to be consumable, and all those things. And you tick the boxes there. Certainly, these are really good whiskies. Yeah,
look, probably the favourite whiskey I've ever consumed was a private bottling from the Springbank distillery. It was a 25-year-old Springbank. I helped the gentleman who had two of these casks sort of sell the casks, and as a thank you, he gave me a bottle from one, and it was an irreplaceable whiskey, absolutely, and 100% my favourite. And I hate it when people talk about their favourite whiskey and you can't buy it. It's because I feel as though they're lying to me. But this was my personal favourite. I've drunk every single drop of that whiskey. There is no bottle sitting on my shelf anywhere. That bottle is gone. It is dead because I loved it so much. And I shared it with friends and had a laugh when I did drink it. So, that's my attitude towards whiskey, right or wrong.
No, it's pretty good. I'm in the nasty habit where I'll drink a bottle down to about a third, and then I'm like, I don't want to finish that off because it was so good and special.
It's we're all very much in that same sort of scenario, and that's literally how we started the podcast as well. It was just the three of us sort of going around to each other's place and
and fighting over the last third.
Exactly right.
Well, it's like people say to me, how do you drink whiskey? And I'd say, well, however you enjoy it, right? So neat, with water, on the rocks, with Coke, Diet Coke, I don't care, right? As long as you're enjoying it, for me, I drink all my whiskey neat, or maybe in an old-fashioned or, another cocktail, but, there's no right or wrong way, and I think that's the thing. It's, I think if we forget that, ultimately we're making something that's meant to enhance a social experience. That's what we're making. So, if you keep that in mind, that's the right attitude, I think.
We can't obviously disclose any future information as well about potential movement of a specific warehouse or distillery, but you did sort of touch on there might be some movement from the Gospel's current premises in the future.
Yeah, well, we're definitely moving. So that's happening. We've long aspired to have a place where we can bring the public. To date, we haven't brought the public into our facility, except for minimal open days and and that sort of thing. So, yeah, we're sort of progressing to have a distillery which will have a public-facing element to it, and yeah, so that'll be announced within the coming sort of look. Whenever we get to the right point, that'll be announced, but at some stage.
Fantastic. And in the meantime as well, is there any festivals, whiskey festivals, or certain shows you guys might be sort of attending with tastings of these products as well in the upcoming future?
That is probably something I should know. I know we are doing a lot. We are doing a lot of shows next year. No, we're doing the night market. We're going to be at the night market and that sort of thing. So,
yep, fantastic. Well, maybe flick us through when you've got some dates and stuff that you're going to do, and we'll pop them up on the socials as well, and let people know.
I should definitely have known that, but yeah, I don't. So there's, we're moving house, moving distillery. Just coming back from Berlin and France, and we're destined to be launching a third SKU next year, so working on that. All these things happening is keeps the brain full. So dates I will have to ask Laura who coordinates that, and Bodie.
Yeah, we've had an exceptional experience here, and it's just nice to walk into these sorts of premises. Obviously, you're looking to put up your cellar door in the new facility and whatnot and all that. But I mean, even just sitting in here having a good little crack around. The barrels are all amongst us, and we're having a good talk. And we're talking to the people that own the distillery, and you can't really ask for much more than that, because they're giving up their time, they're sharing their experiences, telling us the background of this whiskey, and this is how it all happened. And that's the sort of thing that really drives the industry realistically, because these are the people that put the heart and soul, the blood, sweat, and tears into the whiskey, and you can taste that as you're drinking it, and you're hearing the story, and you're sharing the experience with the owners of the company and the head distillers, and they give you that information that you just won't get anywhere else. So it's just like, for that we're grateful, but also, it's just such a great experience. So when this new cellar door and this new premises opens up, you've just got to get out there and you've got to do this. These are local guys. This is Melbourne. You're in Melbourne. Why wouldn't you want to try and see the latest distillery that's open and go and check out? They've got a specific, you're not going to taste this single barrel batch that they've got there open on that day. It's one of those things where, there's just experiences to be had, and certainly, I reckon it's just, you've got to do it. It's just one of those things.
It's fantastic, and something else we like to do on the podcast as well, Andrew, is give a rating. But because we've got we'll rate the two whiskies, the two mainstream whiskies that we're obviously being able to access, and the general public can obviously access. The export was fantastic, but we'll give our ratings on the other two boys. Which was your favourite?
Rating or just picking?
We'll go picking. because they're both 10s. They are actually really, really bloody good. But what are you going to go for your favourite?
Oh, I mean, they each brought a bit of something different to the palate.
They did.
Nose. So it's very hard to compare them. It's not like comparing to oranges or to apples.
This is apples and oranges.
Yeah,
they are completely different.
But if I had to only pick up one bottle at the shop, I'll probably just go their standard range, the
straight rye. Okay, so straight rye for you, Roscoe.
Well, again, there's not a whole heap of difference in price point between the Solera casks and the straight rye grain. So, you know what I mean. If it's really the answer, you need to have them both, because they both bring something different. And if you want to share these experiences with your friends and have a little drink, then you've got to have. Well, why don't we have a glass of the Solera first? Why don't we have a second glass here? Do the straight rye, and it's a really affordable price too. So you haven't sort of blown the bank with buying a nice, whiskey that's made specifically in our little region of the world, and that's what you want to do is you want to share these. This is a business. You've said it yourself. It's a small business, but look, when you walk in here, you think, "Geez, this is not a small business." You'd love to be a co-owner of this one, but yeah, these guys are kicking goals, and yeah, again, it's just one of those things where you're gonna have to have both bottles on your shelf, I think.
But you got to pick one though, mate.
That's a fantastic dodge. I really like that dodge. Hey? That was yeah. Look, I'd just get both. And you know what? Yeah, you should. You do you, buddy. Because I think buy both. I mean, you could buy both and a packet of chips and be less than the average price of Australian whiskey. So yeah, I support that message.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's the truth, because you can buy some very, very expensive whiskies, and both of these, value for money wise. And the time and effort that goes into putting it into a bottle, you sort of, it's really low on price, but it's great to have it at that price, because it does mean that it's purchasable for the everyday consumer, which is a critical part of a small business, obviously. But yeah, they're really good. And look, I'd be happy with the rye grain, specific single rye grain. But yeah, again, the Solera is another characteristic that. If you've got the rye grain at home and you're having a drink of it, then you just can't explain, they've got a Solera bottle as well. It's definitely worth, having a taste of that, because it's got characteristics that are different. And that's the thing about it. It's really important that if you're going to have one, you need to have the other, in my opinion. So,
yeah, and I think you've touched on it there, Roscoe, but this has completely opened up my eyes to rye whiskey as well. This is being the first Australian rye that I've tried. I can safely say I will be trying to delve a little bit more into rye as well in the future, but yeah, that was an exceptional drop. But I think the Solera one for me probably rings home a little bit more, just from a lot of the Soleras that I have had in the past as well. Yeah, that was probably definitely one that sort of just might have pipped it straight at the end. But I think with more and more introduction into my repertoire of the rye whiskey sort of things, I reckon that's fast going to become a very, very big favourite as well. So definitely two terrific whiskies that we would definitely implore all of our listeners and anyone out there as well to get their hands on something to enjoy with friends, family, the whole works. It is a delicious drop, the Gospel Whiskey. Andrew, thank you very much for your time today. You've been an absolute superstar, and we really, really appreciate it, mate, for shelling out your time and showing us your piece of passion that you have here at the distillery, mate. It's fantastic and really enriching to hear all your stories.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, and good luck with the podcast. You are yourself off on a journey in building this platform, so it's exciting. So good luck with it.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much. My, oh my, what a great interview that was with Andrew Fitzgerald, the owner of the Gospel Whiskey. We got a great chance to try some delicious tasting Australian rye whiskies with the Solera, the straight rye, and we also got to taste the little limited release one in there as well that's not available to the Australian market as such. But we had a great time with Andrew there, and we are very much looking forward to when they open up their new premises in the new year. We don't know the exact address just yet, but I'm sure we'll be able to post that on the socials as soon as it becomes public knowledge. But in the meantime, make sure you head down to your local liquor store and pick yourself up a nice, beautiful bottle of the Gospel Whiskey. Check out the socials on Facebook and Instagram. Chuck them a like and follow them on their journey as well. That's all from us. We will catch you again on the next pod. Take it easy.